ultimately, this is the thing that I want my students to walk away with is I just want people to be curious, right?
Yes.
Because I think curiosity really is, that's the seed of hope, right? That's the seed of empathy. Because if you're not curious about your neighbor, then you're never going to have any empathy for them, ultimately.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, I'm Ellen.
Hi, I'm Elly, and this is a podcast with two Asian American women.
Living, learning, and sharing about everyday life cross-generationally.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today we are talking about something pretty different, at least to me, and I think a little bit to Ellen as well. We're talking about the world of gaming. So whether you've been mashing buttons for all of your life or just aware about the different fun games that we have, this will be a little bit of a different topic regarding culture and the world of gaming. It's something that's relevant because we'll have a special guest on here in just a little bit talking about gaming while Asian and what kind of impact that it has on society. But before we get started with our special guest, I wanted to ask you, Ellen, what's been your experience with gaming?
My experience has been mostly tabletop.
Okay.
Monopoly and all that stuff. So all of this online gaming, I've had a little bit of it in college because all of my roommates, had it, a Nintendo or a Sega game. The early console games, right?
Yeah,
But me myself, not a whole lot.
Okay.
I mean, it's Mario.
Yeah, Mario Kart.
Mario, is that the one where they jump? He jumps.
Maybe?
He jumps, I think, with Luigi. I think.
Yeah, Mario Kart. Yeah.
It's the Mario. Okay, that's the one. The
Okay.
Sega one.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a difference between the Sega and the like. It tells you how
You'll have
little
to-
I know. Yeah.
You'll have to tell us then, because I'm not too familiar
Right.
with it too.
But what about you? Like, I think you played more than I have.
I used to be a gamer, depending on how you describe gamer, but as a kid, I grew up playing with my brother games like Mario Kart and the duck shooting game. I don't know if anybody remembers that duck shooting. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but there's this duck shooting game, and then played some computer games. Can't think of the name right now. It was a gun game, and I think it was called Delta Force. So with that piece, I used to play a lot. I mean, that used to be, my family was at work all the time, so that was our kind of way that we connected. Yeah, so I think that it's interesting, connected with others and got rid of that boredom per se.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So interesting.
So we will see. I think that's just a little bit about our background, which is very, very
Very
minimal. But we're so excited to have our next guest up, our Dr. Edmund Chang, and he is an author of Gaming While Asian, published in a publication published in 2024. So we're so excited to have him on. Please welcome Dr. Edmund Chang. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being invited, and then also getting to share this, space with you. And I'm happy to chat about all things gaming, Asian, Generation X, whatever.
We love it. I feel like it's something, gaming is familiar to me as a kid. I grew up with games because my parents were at the restaurant working all the time. So it was a way to connect with, my brother and I would play all the time. We were pretty much addicted. And I know Ellen has a little bit of experience with gaming as a kid too, right?
Well, tabletop for me, but in terms of video gaming, um, Sega Mario, I think it's Mario something. It's the one where they hop.
Right.
He
Yes.
hops.
Yeah.
That is it. And
Yeah.
and it's not really that I'm experienced at it. My roommates played it, and because the console is there, I remember Sega. That's all I remember. And because the console was there, I get to kind of squeeze in a game or two, but nothing at all in terms of being an experienced gamer.
Oh, no worries. I was just gonna say you were allowed to have games.
However, now I do play Pokemon Go. It's been a while. But I do play Pokemon Go.
Okay.
So, and I know the characters, so that's something when I know the characters.
Right.
So with that, can you share, just with our very minimal experience in gaming, but can you share a little bit about just your background, start kicking it off, just a little bit more
Sure.
about who you are?
Sure. I guess I'll do the professional stuff first. I'm currently an associate professor of English at Ohio University, which is in Southeast Ohio. It's in Athens. Not everyone thinks it's Ohio State, but we were actually founded before they were. So, and there I teach primarily 20th century, 21st century American literature. Mostly, I do classes like ethnic American literature. I do women in literature. I do LGBT literature, and so on and so forth. So, and then when every once in a while I'll get a chance to teach some gaming stuff. But my research currently is in video game studies, though I'm branching out into what we call analog game studies. So again, things like tabletop games, so role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, which most people are familiar with, at least in name, board games, live-action role-playing games, card games, those sorts of things. But most of my publications, including the one that you mentioned, is primarily about video games. And I think about queerness in those games, so like sexuality, gender, and stuff like that. And then I've been, in recent years, making this sort of turn towards Asian American studies and thinking about race, identity, and belonging, particularly in gaming sort of domains and spheres.
Nice. I think it's something that I don't think we as maybe a society typically talk about the back end thoughts and maybe stereotypes sometimes as gaming, because gaming, I just think fun, right? Fun.
Right.
It's all fun, but there seems to be a lot of different underneath kind of thoughts and stereotypes that might pop up. And so what got you into it? I'm curious kind of when you first found out and what got you into this field.
Well, I remember, I like to tell a story. When I started my PhD, I was writing about the internet, I was writing about technology, I was writing about, cyberspace, even though we don't use that word anymore, really. And literature, obviously, mostly looking at science fiction, cyberpunk fiction, things like that. And then at the same time, being in graduate school, you always find things that basically allow you to procrastinate. So I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft, mainly because my friends and stuff like that were doing it, and it was a way for us to sort of keep in contact. And so since I was spending so many hours doing that, I was like, hey, can I turn this into research in some way? How might this fit? And I started just sort of writing conference papers primarily, just sort of thinking about ideas. And one of my earliest publications called Gaming as Writing, I think, or something like that. World of Warcraft as World of Wordcraft, and it's a composition studies paper. But I was looking at the ways that the game presented things like race, gender, sexuality in the game. And so that's sort of where sort of came into being, and then I had a lot of success with that, and so that sort of became a larger portion of my research profile, as opposed to writing about literature, which I still do, and things like that. And also, I've been playing games all of my life, and as they say, it's always nice to sort of weave things, your work and the things that you love should kind of be woven together. Not totally necessarily the same thing, but so that's basically where it sort of stems from. And like I said, I initially mostly was thinking about gender, sexuality, and then because there are other specialization, right? People have to pick the thing that they're looking at. But now I'm more interested in particularly thinking about Asian and Asian American kind of identities and embodiments in those games. Not just to talk about stereotypes, because they definitely exist, but to think about the ways that those things matter, maybe in sort of invisible ways, as you were talking about.
Yes. No, I think that's such an important topic because it's not talked about very often. We haven't heard it talked about much.
Right.
And you mentioned you grew up a little bit in middle school. It was in the 80s, right, for you?
Yes.
So generationally, Gen Y? Or?
Fully Gen X.
Gen X, okay. Awesome. So same generation.
Same generation as I'm at.
That's good. That's great.
I don't look at, but that's one of our magical benefits of being Asian, right? As they say.
Yes.
So, I want to kind of delve in right into your publication here. First of all, I want to tell you that that I am. Where am I? I am. Now that I can't find where I am. Hang on. I've lost where I am. And because I've lost where I am, I want to ask you then, because Elly mentioned this in one of our last episodes as I was watching it. She says, I don't consider, when you look at gaming, a lot of people think that it's a kind of a more, techno nerdy kind of, culture. But then Elly mentioned, she goes, I'm too much of a nerd. I'm not really a gamer. So to me, like she kind of flipped it, whereas before people that were nerds are supposedly the ones that game, but then now it's like, no, I'm too nerdy. I'm not cool enough to be considered a gamer. Does that make sense? Do you feel like her thought process? Do you think that that's kind of how it's flipped?
Yes, I would say. To a certain extent, I think. When I was growing up, liking things that I like Dungeons and Dragons, or reading fantasy and science fiction, or playing video games, all those sorts of things, were things that people teach me about, or I was luckily not really super fully bullied by it, but I definitely have had friends have that experience. I think here's the thing is that, and then I think now, because gaming, especially video gaming, digital gaming, has become this massive industry and this massive business and this massive sort of spectator, quote unquote, sport, right? So if we think about esports and things like that, that people sometimes go, oh, okay, I don't, want to distance themselves from that, right? They just want to sort of say, I'm not that serious, right? I just play a game on my phone, or and I think that's part of it, right? The idea that, I'm not cool enough now to play gaming, which I think is sort of a weird reversal. But I would say this, is that for the most part, video games still are kind of considered low culture or entertainment or mass media. And unless you're good at it, or unless you're making money at it, and then it becomes this like, the culture of celebrity kind of around that. And one of the things I note in my essay is that, we often think of Asian bodies or Asian players as being somehow magically good at technology or magically good at math or magically good at video games. When in fact, when I was growing up, I was terrible at most of the games, right? I just never really wanted to develop those, hand-eye coordinations to sort of get really good at it. And so in a lot of ways, like I wasn't living up to my sort of stereotypical potential. And I think that's still true today, right? That people are like, oh, Dungeons and Dragons is so popular now. And we have all these, really cool people playing it. And I was like, yeah, but, if someone like, who do we usually gets referenced? Like Vin Diesel or Joe Manganiello or all these people who are like, celebrities in their own right. Also, they're hot, right? So like pretty privilege goes a long way. And you can do anything nerdy if you're, good looking and successful ultimately. And so I think that's the tension there. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that people think that there is this idea of what a gamer is, and I think that's part of what I'm trying to unpack is that, you said at the very beginning, we're not really gamers. And I was like, I think you are. And I say this to my students, especially the ones that are like, oh, I don't really play a lot, or I don't really know what this is, or but we're in a culture that has absorbed so much of gaming into the way everything looks, right? So like, movies are starting to look more and more like games. Games are starting to look more and more like, movies. We've gamified everything, right? Like, we've put mechanics into everything to sort of turn everything into fun or, that sort of thing. So it's there. We just, part of my goal as an educator or as a scholar is really to sort of let's pay attention in case those things are maybe, not doing great things for us.
And I'm glad you said that because so you're saying about, oh, we're all gamers in each in our particular way, but as I read your publication and it's again, as a gamer, I was trying very hard to like, okay, what's the point? So let me, not what's the point, but what are your key points?
Yeah.
So let me tell you that I am why do I keep losing myself
No
here.
worries.
Oh, here. I'm the one that wants to get a pizza, go home to watch cartoons, try to escape, and two-thirds of your last question, I zone out to the music leaving the party and head to the backyard. Okay? So that kind of tells you where I am in the game and where I am in your game. The way that you structure that in your, and there's a reason why I jumped to your publication. When you talk about that, I'm reading it as, is that the labyrinth or the game? How you introduce, the labyrinth or the game from, what is it, Dr. The Argentinian guy? I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Is that sort of like, you're talking about the game, sort of kind of like that hidden, it's a game, it's an introduction of a game within the game publication. You know what I'm saying? And then based on that, and I don't know if this is layer upon layer of questions to you, and maybe I'm losing my train of thought here.
You're in the labyrinth. It's okay.
I'm in the labyrinth, right? So with that, because you say that we're all gamers, when you're saying stereotypes and when you're saying that there's a lack of representation, when I'm playing a game, when I go in a game, and maybe there's a difference between online and tabletop, I don't know, because I'm more tabletop. I'm not thinking per se so much about me as what I look like, but me as how I feel.
Sure.
You know, so is there a difference? So I don't know, I'm throwing a lot of things at you one time here. So help kind of reel us in here.
Sure. So for the listeners, watchers that aren't familiar with the essay, Gaming While Asian is in a book called Made in Asia America, and it's a book edited by Christopher Patterson and Tara Fickle. You can find it if you email me. I'm happy to send it to you. But it's an essay written in the form of a choose your own adventure, and part of what I've been doing in my career is to sort of rethink or play with, who wants to read, a 35-page essay anymore, that kind of thing, right? And so I wanted to invite the reader to play a game as I'm thinking about what games, ask us to do. And part of the essay is about what does it mean to be Asian or Asian American playing a game, or being part of a game, or what choices you get in the game, that sort of thing, right? I'm always reminded, of a very famous bit by the Korean American comedian Margaret Cho, who talks about, this was years ago, who talks about, when she auditions for a role in the past, she was only given like 3 options to play, right? So it's like a foreign exchange student, or a computer programmer, or some sort of Tai Chi master, right? And this idea that Asian identities and bodies are only given particular kinds of spaces in the world, whether it is in a movie or even in a game. And so part of the essay is sort of thinking through that. But also, for me, the essay mixes memoir, a little bit of creative writing, obviously scholarly writing, there's a little bit of code in it, all these sorts of things to think about all of these ideas. And I think this is the thing is, we grow up in a world where in a lot of ways we're told, especially by American culture, that we're special, we're unique, we're an individual, and that it's up to us to sort of forge our own path, right? This rugged individualism. And because of that, then, when we look at things around us, we're invited to say, oh, I may not see myself, but I know how to relate to this or connect to this or that sort of thing, right? But of course, that only gets us so far. And this is why thinking about, well, who actually does get to be, the star, or who actually does get to be the hero, or whose stories are even being told, I think is part of the things that I'm trying to sort of, or a lot of us are trying to sort of think through and talk about, right? Like I imagine even as you're starting, you're working on this podcast that like, is there an audience, right? We were talking about this earlier before recording. Well, that audience is there, are they used to seeing or hearing these stories, and I think that's really, and of course the answer is absolutely necessary and needed. But it's about sort of making those connections, I think, in a lot of ways. And I just wanted, part of the essay talks about like all of the people I saw in games or in movies or in novels or whatever were not people that looked like me or had lives like me, right? Yeah. Unless I was reading, Amy Tan or Maxine Hong Kingston or whatever, right? But that becomes its own sort of little niche part of the world. I could go on for this forever. I will say though, one of the things I ban in my class is the word relatable. I hate it personally. It's terrible. For me, people are like, oh, this character is so relatable. And I was like, what does that mean, right? Because if you relate to them, tell me how you relate to them. Or is this character even something that you can even access, right? Because sometimes stories are not about us or not for us, and that's okay. That has to be okay.
Yeah.
and that this idea that, oh, I can quote unquote walk a mile in another person's shoes, I think is really fraught, right? Like I get the spirit behind that idea, but no one will ever know who I am, right? No one will ever know what it's like to be in the inside this skin, and even other Asian people, right? And I think that's really important to note. Yes, pay attention to similarities and resonances and those sorts of things, but I also think we have to pay attention to, like, hey, what makes us different or unique, or and find relationships in that.
So do you think then, Dr. Chang, that I think you mentioned Dragon's Lair as one of the sort of like the starting game that from the like cinematic point of view, I guess, that kind of started a lot of the online gaming. I don't know if I'm understanding that correctly, but from there, I agree or disagree. Am I right? That because you mentioned Dragon's Lair as sort of like a starting where the cinematic gaming world kind of starts or stems from.
Oh, you're talking about Dragon's Lair.
Well, you mentioned it. Yeah.
Dragon's Lair is a video game that came out in the 80s, and it was one of the first games to basically use what we would call quick time events. Basically, the game had all these little animated clips, and you play through the game and it would play certain clips.
So kind of realism, close to like how it is now, where it's like you're like in a real world, 3-dimensional as opposed to the 2-dimensional. So
it was much more obviously realistic,
right? And that's where I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
So do you think then that from that time, your first mention to now, has it progressed? Has the gaming industry, with the lack of, like, all of your mentions of lack of representation and all of those things that are, there is, but then it's uber Asian, uber exemplified. Right. Do you think that it's changed now? I mean, because recently, and as I read your publication, I just can't seem to get it on the same understanding as the movie industry, right? Right now, there's this what all of the social media influencers say is there's Asian explosion out there with everything Asian, right, coming out. K-pop, the music, all these award winners in the Oscars of actresses, of movies. Do you think that the game industry has followed that trend?
Yeah,
Is it better?
If I were better prepared, maybe I can find it, or maybe I could give it to you later. You can link it. But the industry statistics for both Hollywood and for video games, not much has actually changed. I think what we're seeing is a lot more attention.
Gotcha.
Right?
That's good to know.
And so, I love me some Michelle Yeoh, and I loved Everything Everywhere All at Once. I thought it was amazing. It made me bawl my face off. But I think, I always say, just think about this, that this is the first time an Asian woman has won an Oscar for, a leading role in 120 years or whatever it is. It's less than that, right? It's pretty crazy. But I think the number of roles and the number of speaking parts and the number of characters in video games really has stayed pretty stable, right? And I think that's the problem, obviously, right? Yeah. It seems like there is this Asian American renaissance happening, but that's only because we're paying attention to it more, which is good. That's great. That's really important, right? But it's really about, like, when you get down to the nitty gritty, like who's pulling the levers of power, who has the money, who can finance things, who can, be in stuff, I think is still, still pretty conservative, right? Obviously it's gotten better over the years, but I do think, I think it's still pretty low, and maybe even, I think in Hollywood, maybe even sort of backsliding a little bit. But there are statistics that I can't reference off the top of my head for it.
That's okay. No, thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's something that we can talk to you forever because it's such an interesting, it's an interesting topic. I just never looked at gaming like that, with the representation and the sort of connection representation that it involves, and that maybe what the behind the scenes, whether it's money or resources that play a part in what we see on the front end.
Right.
And even the, one of the first things I did was who wrote these games, who were the developers for the games that you mentioned, and all of them were not Asian. So, I mean, these are things that that's the reason. So how then do we start, like this podcast? I was like, well, I don't see, I mean, really, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is I don't see any gray-haired Asian, Gen X that is not in the health or beauty that wants to talk about these issues. And I'm like, well, if I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it? So are we getting that? Is there more game developers now that are within the, it's, I'm very, very curious to know that, what is a question for you? I mean, you end your publication and hope. What is your hope? What is your hope for gamers or the gaming industry?
I think my hope is for the broader culture, right? I think, let's just take the U.S. context, right? I don't want to get overly political, but I do think that it's really important, right? That we're watching the sort of retraction of rights, of what counts as American, who gets to be here, who gets to speak, who gets to do things. And I think that, obviously, I think one of the things that we have to work on constantly is to sort of build, continue to build those sort of communities and build empathy, build curiosity. And I think that in the industries like the gaming industry or in Hollywood or whatever, right? I do think it's still really important that that there are underrepresented people, marginalized people that still that we have to figure out ways to sort of welcome in, right? Ultimately, I'm one of those people that's like, let's we're stronger with the diversity ultimately, right? Which has become obviously a bad word now. But even if we go to science, which of course is also being questioned, but biodiversity is healthy, right? And if we care about, I have to think about the biodiversity of my, my gut, then we should also think about that. I started thinking about health influencers or beauty influencers, right? That we should do that at the sort of cultural, political scale, ultimately. My hope is that, let's let more people make things. Let more people talk about stuff, right? And also not pigeonhole people into, into particular roles, right? I think if you are a member of the dominant culture, if you're a member of what I call, if you're a universal subject, right? If you're straight, white, cisgendered, male, educated, property, all that sort of stuff, you get to talk about whatever you want. But the minute you're, a gray-haired Gen X, Asian, queer man, suddenly you're only allowed to talk about like this so much of the universe, right? And I think those are things that we have to sort of negotiate. Ultimately, this is the thing that I want my students to walk away with is I just want people to be curious, right?
Yes.
Be curious about the world around you. Be curious about yourself. Be curious about the plants that grow outside of your house. Like, be curious about food. All these sorts of things, because I think curiosity really is, that's the seed of hope, right? That's the seed of empathy. Because if you're not curious about your neighbor, then you're never going to have any empathy for them, ultimately.
Yeah,
I agree.
And like I said earlier, right? Like, not all experiences, not all stories, not all worlds are for us or for our consumption, but that doesn't mean we should engage in them, ultimately, right? And engage in them in ways, of course, that are appropriative or just purely consumptive, right? So that's my hope. And is gaming going to solve that? Is Hollywood going to solve that? Probably not. But I do think this is the great thing about
No, don't say probably not.
Oh,
Hope.
well, I mean,
Hope.
in the sense
Hope.
of like, all right, retraction, right? Take that, reverse it. No, I think it's one way, right? As I said, like, I think this is the important thing. As a literature professor, as a media studies scholar, all these sorts of things, we need to imagine different worlds, right?
Yes.
That's the whole reason we read or watch movies or play games or listen to podcasts or listen to music or whatever. In that process, you're imagining a different world. That world might be sad, or that world be happy, or that world might be dystopic, that world might be full of war. But that allows us to start thinking about things in ways that, again, hopefully build curiosity and empathy, right? Ultimately. So that's the hope, right? That as long as we can imagine a better world, then eventually, hopefully, we will get to it. But we should, and that's the thing, people are like, oh, utopia is not real, or utopia is too abstract or too Pollyanna or whatever. Well, just because we can't get to utopia doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to get there,
Definitely.
right? Because that's the only way things change and hopefully get better.
Nice.
Well, Dr. Chang, thank you so much for, fulfilling our curiosity, at least about the gaming culture, a little bit about the gaming culture. We would love to keep talking to you another time, delve into it even deeper. But for folks out there, do you want to either, you mentioned your email, I don't know if you want to share anything, how people, maybe your social media or maybe an email address for folks, how should people reach you if you want to be reached?
Sure. You can just Google Edmund, Edmondy, Chang, just my name, and you should be able to find me. I'm all over the place, so pretty easy to find. I'm also locatable at the Ohio University website. Yeah. Again, only nice things, though. Don't send me.
Exactly. Only things related to love and connection and the things that we want to build more in. And I know you want to build more in the community and the world, which is just such a great goal of yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm hoping your goal too, right?
Yes.
I think this is a thing. I was really, just maybe this is a nice little tag, but I was really excited to come on here. Not only because I think this idea of like thinking generationally, I think is really important, but if you think about Asian or Asian American stories, all we get is, speaking of, everywhere, everything all at once, is like generational trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I love teaching Amy Tan, I love teaching Maxine Hunkingston, but, those writers of that particular era coming out of the 60s, 70s were like, oh, you can only talk about the immigrant experience and you can only talk about generational trauma. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's that narrowing of our experience, mm-hmm. right? But at the same time, that's there. That's part of our experience. And so I think what you're doing is a transformation of that experience, not just dwelling in it or not just selling it as, look, this is just who we are.
Thank you.
So,
That's
we're
so nice.
thriving
Thank
too,
you. Thank you. That means a lot from somebody so well known. Thank you so much.
Well, I wish I were super well known. Yeah,
You are. We really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to chat with you, because it's been so phenomenal and very insightful too.
Happy to be here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll put the description, put your contact information or how to find you in the description. And if you're good with it, maybe if you could stay on maybe for like 5-10 minutes after, we might put it as a bonus clips or something at the end.
Okay.
So thank y'all so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Edmund Chang, too. We appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.